as communities fracture and strong language turns to violence. The question for security forces is when to step in. The Brussels suspects were allowed to move around unchallenged, and yet intense debate among people online is attracting police attention. Well, joining me now to discuss this a bit further is Reza Kazim. He's from the Islamic Human Rights Council in Britain, and also Stephen Morris. He's from the English Democrats Party. Good evening to you both. Thanks for coming on to RT. Now, look, we are hearing, aren't we, today, a man in South London was charged for inciting racial hatred for tweeting that he'd asked a Muslim woman in the street to explain the Brussels attacks. Let's start with you, Reza. What's your reaction to this? Are you pleased the police reacted in the way they did?
First of all, it's Resendine from MPACUK, different organisation, but
sorry.
That's fine. I appreciate the mix-up as it happens. But regarding this particular gentleman, Matthew Doyle, the reason that Scotland Yard gave was that there was suspicion of him, trying to incite racial hatred via social media. So on that basis, yes, they are correct. I think what's more worrying is that someone would feel that you could stop someone in the street in the UK about a terrorist fringe extremist organisation that's operating, that committed a terrorist attack in Brussels. I think that's quite worrying, that kind of where we've gone down the road as a country, that it's, for someone to be approaching someone else in this country, it's ridiculous, it's racist.
Stephen, let's bring you in here. What do you think of this? Some people have believed this is political correctness gone mad. What's your viewpoint?
My view is, what were the police officers thinking of when they were arresting this guy? Bearing in mind, London was on high alert, and we needed to have all the police officers on the street, and yet they're arresting this man for something of asking a Muslim woman about the attacks by Muslims in Brussels. We wouldn't need to ask these questions if the Muslim communities came out and started to address the problems and started to tell people and put things out. But what we've got is a lack of communication from the Muslims. They're not coming out in droves to say they condemn it. What they're doing, anybody who asks a question, they're vilifying them. Now, this guy probably had a genuine reason why to ask somebody, because he wanted to know their view on it. Now, if the Muslims want people to stop asking the questions, then they've got to come out and ask it and tell them.
OK, let's bring in Reza. Obviously, Stephen there thinks that the Muslim community should be doing more, and perhaps the gentleman there, was it Matthew Doyle, perhaps had good reason to ask the question that he asked. What's your response to that?
Well, no, because if some far-right white Christian terrorist was to commit an act of terror in Europe, it wouldn't make sense for me to contact someone in Plymouth and say, "Oh, Andy, what do you think? What are you going to do about this problem?" It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's a stupid. If you actually start to dissect what actually took place, it's so stupid, and that's why the internet, especially Twitter, exploded at ridicule at this man, saying that, "What are you even playing at? Asking a random British person on the street?" It doesn't make any sense at all. But regarding the point that's been mentioned by your other guest about, Muslims need to do more, the reality is, for people like him, it will never be enough. You have often seen people saying that they are angry
about... What do you mean for people like me? What do you mean for people like me? You're categorising me already when you've just said people like me.
Yeah,
all we've said is that we want the Muslim community to come out and be proactive in trying to address these. So please explain what you mean by people like
someone living in Croydon.
We're here to debate the problem of Islamic terrorists.
Yeah.
OK, Stephen, just give Reza a chance there. Please explain. People like him was the phrase you used. Do you want to expand on that?
I'll explain what I mean by that. He's from the English Democrats, and I've been researching them as well. What I mean by them is I'm talking about people of this white supremacist ideology that exists in the UK.
And you categorise me as white supremacist, because that is clearly offensive and derogatory. So you better be able to back that one up.
Yeah, well, you prove it every time you're opening your mouth. And the thing is now regarding
I've asked you to give me the evidence to show what you have just called me about being a white supremacist. I'm a trade union official, and I represent people from all communities. So please tell me, you've categorised me as a white supremacist, people like me, now back it up.
Yep, you're making my case for me, so it's completely fine. Regarding your point, though...
Gentlemen, can I just jump in here, just as a response?
You have said people like me are white supremacists, because that is categorically wrong, and you have no evidence.
No, the evidence comes out with the tone in your language, the way your accusatory tone, the whole thing, your line of questioning, the whole thing is
people like me, white supremacists,
talking down to Muslims as if I have to answer for the crimes of a group that was created from the Iraq War. It didn't come out of Islam; it came out of the Iraq War. And to hold someone in Croydon for account for something that happened by a terrorist organisation is the height of stupidity, and shows
never held her to account. He asked her a valid question. He never held her to account. He asked the Muslim woman, what does she think about the atrocities in Brussels?
If we're going to play this game, then why don't you apologise for the Iraq War that Tony Blair took us to? Because he's another white Christian guy as well, right? Why don't you apologise for
Blair? I don't support Tony Blair.
Okay, gentlemen, please. I'm struggling to understand what either of you are saying now because you're talking over each other. But let's just come back to this point that initially police arrested this man, Matthew Doyle, for making what many people thought was a comment that he shouldn't have made, and he's now being charged for inciting racial hatred. Do you feel that within the past week or so, in the days after these terrible bombings in Brussels, do you sense that racial tension has increased in the UK? That's you, Reza, first.
Undoubtedly. I mean, we saw the same thing after the Paris attacks, where we had a sharp increase in the number of attacks on Muslims in the UK and in other parts of Europe as well. You know, people being murdered outside their front doors, for example, in Paris, people being attacked in the UK, and especially in London, we saw a big increase too. So these things are linked, and it is worrying, and people like your other guests, they do exacerbate the problem because they lay the blame at the door of Muslims in the UK who have nothing to do with this problem.
I'm not sure Stephen is doing that. To be fair to Stephen, do you want to respond to that, Stephen? Are you laying the blame at Muslims' doors?
That the Muslims have to come out and be active to try and sort out the problem with the Muslim communities.
See, this is what doesn't make sense. See, let me explain to you why it doesn't make sense. You've got Muslims who are day and night talking about these issues. All you got to do is there's this secret tool. It's called Google. If you were to use it, you'd see what Muslims are saying on Twitter, on Facebook, on their websites, through their organizations. But the reality is, it's just not enough for some people because they've brought into this narrative that says, oh, it's all to do with Islam, all to do with Muslims, when actually no, it's a product of the Iraq War where these extremists have been born out of. Don't ask me to clean up your mess. It's a mess that we can help you clean up, but it's not my mess. And
the Iraq War was a legal war done by the Labour government, and I have already told you that I objected to that war, right? So don't bring that war into it. I did object to that. What you've got at the moment is a problem of Islam and Islamic terrorists.
Doesn't actually make any sense. See, this is the thing. This is where all your knowledge falls down, because if you look at the academic literature, you look at those that actually interview those that are involved in ISIS, they talk to you. You've got hardcore secularist people that are part of the Ba'athist government that are involved with Saddam Hussein in the past. They're not hardcore Islamic fundamentalists, as you'd like to call them. Some of these people are just after power, and they're using them as Islamic State. And this is why, for Muslims, and I mean, all you got to do is do your research, and you understand what you're saying doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
The research shows that you go on about the Islamic State is about the Christians that are persecuted, the gays that are persecuted, women's rights. There is none. So when you go on about the Islamic State and how good it is, it's not good for Christians, it's not good for gay people.
Who said it's good?
And it's certainly not good for women.
Confused.
It is divisive in itself.
And see, look, this is the problem right there. Nowhere have I said at all that ISIS in any way, shape or form are good. But because I'm daring to question you blaming all Muslims, does that mean I'm painting ISIS as good?
Can I
just ask, Stephen started this debate by saying he would like to see the... Stephen, let me speak for one moment, please. Stephen, you started this debate by saying you'd like to see the Muslim community speak out more against atrocities. What more can they do?
Well, recently we've just seen one come out in Glasgow who's actually saying that we're true Islam, true Muslims. What's he still doing? Is he not supposed to be arrested? An imam in Glasgow saying that the people who've done it are true Muslims?
Well, they should be arrested, right? I mean, no one's against that, right? The thing is, that's the problem to take up with the studies. How can you allow them to say
the same thing? Because nobody in this country will want to address the issue. And the issue is to do with Islam and the people in the Muslim community.
What I find
coming out and doing stuff.
This is an important thing that often comes out from white supremacists, is that it's this majority who feel a threat from a minority, and this needs to be broken down straight away.
White supremacy. Show me the evidence. You're just making false accusations because you can't debate, you can't win the argument because there is a problem with Islam and the Muslim communities. You keep calling white supremacists. That is completely false, and you've got no evidence to show that. Otherwise,
statistically you're incorrect, academically incorrect, factually incorrect. Everything you said is incorrect. It's based on a bigoted mindset, and you've brought into a narrative.
Okay.
I can't help.
Gentlemen, can I just move this debate on slightly?
Regarding your point about some imam or any individual making comments backing ISIS or whatever, that person should be arrested. That goes without saying. That needs to be further questioned. Ain't no one at all backing that. But for you to say that somehow we're part of this massive agenda, or I've got to be held accountable, the way you talk is as if I'm on some big WhatsApp group with everyone in ISIS saying, "Oh lads, what do you want to do today? Oh, well, you know what, I'm going to be grooming some kids today. You commit some benefit fraud." We're not all talking to each other. And this is the difference is a white individual can commit an act of terror.
I can't hear what you're saying.
As an individual.
Gentlemen, I can't hear what you're saying if you both talk over each other. Please be quiet for 1 minute. I'd like to move this topic on slightly. Rita, starting with you firstly, what do you think needs to be done? What should the authorities do to try and prevent and try and lessen Islamophobia if you fear that that is what is happening now in the UK?
It's a wholesale thing that needs to be addressed. Part of the way we talk about terror, we're not having a real conversation in the UK. It's rhetoric, it's shouting over each other, as you've seen today, and the government aren't really interested in addressing the problem and talking about their unethical foreign policy, which actually exacerbates the problem, supporting countries like Saudi Arabia and all these other people, and essentially allowing ISIS a free rein in that sense, because they're not actually stopping Saudi Arabia and others and stopping that sale of arms. So for me, for us to move forward as a society to tackle Islamophobia, tackle terrorism, tackle extremism, what we need is that uncomfortable, real conversation. And that is what you often see from the government being clamped down.
Let's have the real conversation. There is a problem with Islam. Right?
No,
that's where the conversation starts.
And the problem is this, individuals like this, they want to blame a religion.
You call them white supremacists and people like them.
And say something to do with them doesn't make any sense.
Stephen, can I just ask you directly, what would you like to see the authorities do to try and lessen the tensions that are clearly there at the moment, just listening to both of you now and also the stories we've seen that have come out of the UK this week? What would you like to see the authorities do to try and lessen the tensions and improve the situation?
The authorities have got to start to answer the question, start to open up. As we saw in Rotherham in Yorkshire, the police were complicit in keeping it all quiet. They didn't want to know. In Rochdale, 127 warnings of child grooming, kept quiet because they didn't want to upset the community. We need these communities to open up. We can't be afraid to raise the questions and ask them what's going on in that community.
Point, please, on this particular point, please.
Go ahead.
That it's what my issue with this thinking is that we are never treated as individuals. There was a report that came from the University of Huddersfield about grooming and terrorism and other cases, about how these things are covered in the media and covered generally and spoken about by politicians. If a white individual was to commit an act of child sexual exploitation or an act of terrorism or extremism, we talk about the crime. We don't talk about the background of the criminal.
There's a difference between one white person doing it, but we're talking on a massive scale. Thousands upon thousands of girls were raped by Islamic
Can I finish my point, please, on this point?
Stephen, just let Risa finish his point now, and I'll come back to you in 10 seconds.
One or two blokes, it was on a massive scale.
A white guy is always going to be an individual. When it comes to Muslims, we're part of a collective group, and that racist thinking is actually stopping us in actually dealing with the issues and just blaming the community that is actually suffering from this the most.
Muslims and Islam is not a race; it's a religion.
Oh, please understand racism, you flipping ignorant
come away
bigot.
from that racist tag.
Oh, please, you don't understand racism, you ignorant bigot. Go away.
Okay, look, gentlemen, we'll wrap it up there, I think, because clearly there's a lot of tension between you both.
It's a religion that has kept quiet about the mass.
Stephen Morris from the English Democrats, thank you. Thanks for coming on to RT this evening. And Reza, just the final word for you, sir. Go on quickly, we've got 15 seconds or so left.
Very much. This kind of racist thinking needs to be tackled head on, but also our government needs to be held to account for the way that they've allowed this problem to get worse and worse in relations to this country and the problem of ISIS. They need to be held accountable.
Okay, our thanks to you both for coming on to RT and giving us your views. Thank you. That was Reza Kazim and also Stephen Morris there from the English Democrats Party. Thank you. You're watching RT International. We'll be back.
Very hungry. Very hungry as Hawk.
I don't know if that's recorded.